forum. Tonight we are going to be talking about the first ballot initiative on the Nevada ballot this fall. And this initiative would make constitutional changes regarding the Nevada system of higher education's Board of Regents. Our moderator for this event will be the Reno Gazette-Journal's Taylor Avery. And with us to discuss the issue are Jason Geddes, a member of the Board of Regents representing Washoe and Pershing counties, and Elliot Anderson, a former member of the Nevada Assembly. Each representative is going to have 2 minutes to give their introductory statements. Each representative is going to have 1 minute to respond to questions. We're going to have some back and forth, hopefully lively and informative discussion during this event. With that, I am going to hand things over to Taylor Avery. I'm sorry, actually, let's get started on the introductions. Elliot, we're going to start with you. You have 2 minutes to make your initial pitch. Go ahead.
Great, thank you so much, and good evening to everyone and everybody out there watching. My name is Elliot Anderson, and just a brief introduction. I've been a public servant my entire life, a U.S. Marine veteran of Afghanistan, an advocate for veterans, a former assemblyman, and attorney. I'm here today to be speaking in my capacity as a concerned citizen and the author of the law that led to question 1. And before I begin, I would just like to thank the Gazette-Journal, our moderator, and Regent Geddes for being here for this important discussion on modernizing Nevada's higher education system. Question 1, which is also known as the Nevada Higher Education Reform, Accountability, and Oversight Amendment, will drastically improve Nevada's colleges and universities. Nevada spends $1.2 billion on higher ed, but without real oversight on how that money is spent. According to the U.S. Census Bureau and the State Higher Education Executive Officers Association, Nevada ranks 16th in per student spending, but 46th in college attainment because of decades of wasteful spending. Question 1 will bring accountability to Nevada's colleges and universities and ensure that our tax dollars stay where they belong, the classroom. For decades, the Regents have squandered millions on pet projects, expensive salaries for administrators, and host accounts for education bureaucrats to buy meals and drinks, all while raising student tuition. Question 1 will bring much needed oversight and accountability to the Regents, restore trust, and make the Regents subject to the same laws as other state agencies without changing the day-to-day of higher ed. Question 1 passed nearly unanimously in 2 sessions with conservative, liberal, and moderate support. It has the support of Northern Nevada business leaders like EDON, Randy Thompson with the NFIB, labor unions like the Northern Nevada Building Trades and the AFL-CIO, community advocates like Sheila Leslie, students, faculty, former community college presidents of Truckee Meadows Community College and Western Nevada College. There's broad support. Vote yes on 1, and thank you, and I'm looking forward to the debate.
Great, thank you, Elliot. Jason Geddes, take it away.
Thank you, Assemblyman Anderson, for introducing it. I've been involved in the Nevada system of higher education since 1988, when I was a student government leader up at UNR, and more currently, after being in the legislature, I've been on the Board of Regents for 14 plus years now. I would say vote no on question 1. And the main reason why is there is plenty of oversight from the Nevada system of higher education. This initiative of AGR 5 that Assemblyman Anderson and Senator Woodhouse brought forward in 17 and 19 is about more control for the Nevada legislature and ultimately to remove your right to vote for regents. And that is very clear. In 2017, Senator Woodhouse stated that AGR 5 was part of a 2-part reform package. And in 2019, when she introduced it, she said this would allow for more reform. And then she introduced Senate Bill 354, which reduces the number of regions from 13 to 9. And it creates a hybrid board of 5 elected and 4 appointed regents. That passed with pretty much the same numbers in the Senate. And in the Assembly, it failed to pass. And Assemblyman Anderson testified that we should not let SB 354 pass because if it passes, and I'm paraphrasing, I'm sorry, Elliot, but if it does pass and they see that we're going to make regents appointed, it will decrease the chances of Q1 passing at the ballot box. The other concerning part is part 2 of the bill is dealing with academic freedom. And I think Assemblyman Anderson's intent was very good in trying to ensure academic freedom by putting it into the Constitution. But what it actually does is let the legislature define what academic freedom is.
Great. Thank you, Jason Geddes. All right. With that, I'm going to hand things off to Taylor Avery. Taylor, your first question.
Hi. So I really want to start off with that last point about academic freedom and letting the legislature define what academic freedom is. But Regent Geddes, could you provide a definition of academic freedom that you believe that the Board of Regents currently provides?
Basically, the Board of Regents and the system have adopted the AAUP, the American Association of University Professionals, definitions for academic freedom. But in our mindset, we have worked through the academic freedom with the faculty, with the staff, with the students at the institutions to say, these are the freedoms you have on our campuses. This is what you can say, and this is what you can't say. And that model of shared governance that we've worked on through the years has been fantastic. And again, I applaud Assemblyman Anderson for putting that into this amendment. But what it does is it allows the legislature to further define that. And in 2015, we had a senator who thought that the opinions on campus were too liberal and the professors had too much academic freedom to talk about whatever they wanted to, and they wanted to restrict what professors could say in the classroom. Fortunately, the legislature had their heads about them. They didn't let that bill get out of the Senate. But that opportunity will exist in perpetuity if Q1 passes.
And Assemblyman Anderson, would you like to provide any rebuttal to that, I guess?
Sure. Well, it's important to note that the First Amendment of the United States Constitution trumps Nevada State Constitution, first of all, and that's really where academic freedom comes from. And so the legislature cannot legally take away the First Amendment rights under the United States Constitution. So this is kind of just a little bit of a fear-mongering, respectfully, Regent Geddes, because you know, we all have free speech provisions in the U.S. Constitution, in the Nevada State Constitution, and it's very, even though the legislature has the power to pass the law, they can't just get rid of academic freedom, because Question 1 protects academic freedom along with the other bases in the law. And, you know, this is, as a lawyer, you know, I'll tell you that this is very, very strong. And, you know, the reality of it is there's nothing stopping the Board of Regents from taking away academic freedom. They just have to get 7 votes and they could try to strip it away. Now, they would be subject to a court count challenge, but if the regents were to take away academic freedom, they would have no accountability for that because of without Question 1.
Thank you. So, Mr. Anderson, I'd like to go back to really what were your motivations behind creating, writing, and pushing this ballot question through the legislature?
So, you know, I think the history of the legislature and the Board of Regents go back a long way. And in 1948, the Board of Regents sued to negate the framers of the Constitution's original intent. They argued that an advisory board shouldn't be able to give them advice. And, you know, so they sued and they kind of got that negated, where the framers of the Constitution said the regents are not entitled to absolute control and that the legislature may prescribe the duties of the Board of Regents. But they sued and they kind of, you know, got that original intent negated. You know, then in 1981, you know, their lawyers also sued and said that they were entitled to absolute immunity and virtual autonomy from the law. And so that attitude kind of kept on going throughout. In fact, one of the lawyers who made that argument in 1981, or at least was a part of a law firm that made that argument, was then hired by the system of higher education to be their chancellor and general counsel. And so, you know, this is an attitude that we're trying to fix, and that's really what's going on: accountability and transparency.
I just have to disagree with Assemblyman Anderson, as we did in 17 and 19 sessions, as well as he's in his earlier comment, he said it was a red herring. He also said that pulling us from the Constitution that would allow them to make us appointed was a red herring. So everything that we argue is a red herring. And I just disagree with that outset. But Assemblyman Anderson's talking about lawsuits that the Supreme Court and the courts adjudicated on our side in interpreting the Constitution. But the most recent one was 1981. So we're talking about a 39-year-old lawsuit that we're bringing up as evidence of bad attitude or irresponsible. We know, and as the Assembly Legislative Council Bureau member pointed out, we have a very thin slice of sovereign power. The legislature controls our budget. The legislature, through the Nevada revised statutes, has defined over 320 different sections on what our authority is. And they have that power and they execute it. And they should be able to.
And to that point, Mr. Geddes, their proponents of the ballot question say that there is a need for greater oversight into the Board of Regents. And something that I've seen pointed to over and over and over is the Las Vegas Review-Journal's 2012 investigation into then Chancellor Dan Kleitch and his drafting of a letter under a consultant's letterhead. Do you have a response to this incident being used as evidence in the call for greater accountability from the regents?
No, I think it's completely valid that it came out and the way that it came out. And I would say the board addressed it. You know, we follow the open meeting law. And in over 16 years, we have not had a violation of the open meeting law. Every issue that we have, budget, policy, is posted, publicly noticed. There's public comment. We discuss it in an open public meeting. It's posted on the website. Everything we do is transparent and visible to the voters. In the case of that incident, we hired an attorney from New York to investigate all of the emails, review all of the emails, look for any misconduct on behalf of the former chancellor and his staff. And that report came out and it was presented to the board, and there was no misconduct found. The only end result was inappropriate emails and inappropriate conversations, but nothing illegal and nothing wrong.
So could I respond to that, Ms. Avery?
Yes.
So, you know, Regent Geddes said that that investigation was handled appropriately and said a lawyer from New York hired it. But I think if memory serves, it was actually board counsel Dean Gould who certified that he could not find cause to fire Dan Kleitch and actually read all the emails himself, if memory serves. And I'll have to check those facts. So if I'm wrong on that, that's my recollection. But with respect, I mean, the chancellor of the system of higher education knew that the legislature was relying on having an independent consultant vet this information. The Board of Regents are the only ones who think that nothing wrong happened. And I think this shows why question one's outside accountability provisions are needed. Regent Geddes is acting like this is just a decades old, you know, the problems happened a decade ago. They've never stopped happening. You know, we had obfuscation of reports about community colleges and constant scandal after scandal. And that's why the legislature, all Republicans and Democrats and business and labor are all supporting question one.
I need to correct that, Assemblyman Anderson, is that this all occurred prior to the hiring of Dean Gould, so he was not involved in any way. So that all the investigation and the report that came out that we made public and put out in a public meeting preceded that. So I would say that's out there. And again, no offense to our hosts, but what's always reported in the paper isn't always the true facts. And when we look at the facts of what happened, we hired a consultant and there was an interim committee of the Nevada Legislature to look at the funding formula. The interim committee of the legislature, headed up by Senator Horsford, hired an outside consultant, SRA International, to evaluate a formula funding study. At the time in the debate of hiring SRI, we told them we didn't have the data available to give it to them, and we would have to hire NCHEMS, which is a national higher ed organization, to provide the data to SRI. And we did that. And all that information went to SRI, which is a consultant for the legislature. They accepted it in the interim committee. SRI vetted all the data, and then the legislature adopted the formula and approved it with the same near unanimous votes as AGR 5.
You know, Could I respond again, Miss Avery? This has just been a little bit more free flowing. Is that okay?
Yeah, as long as we're on topic.
Absolutely. So, just again to clarify, Regent Geddes is not saying that they've done anything wrong. And there's not anybody in the state of Nevada except the Board of Regents and their staff who think that nothing wrong has happened. The legislature of the state of Nevada, Republicans, Democrats, moderates, liberals, conservatives all disagree. We have business organizations such as Chambers of Commerce, we have NFIB, we have EDON, who all believe that the Board of Regents has not done a good job holding themselves accountable. And I think the funding formula, we're still hearing excuses. We can read the emails, Regent Geddes, and you paid the chancellor $300,000 or whatever his contract was, finding that nothing wrong happened. There's no one in the state of Nevada except the Board of Regents who thinks that. And this just goes to show that even today, the Board of Regents will not hold themselves accountable. And I would submit to the voters of Nevada, that's why we need question 1 to hold the regents accountable.
And I just need to clarify, I'm speaking as myself, as an individual regent. I am not speaking for the board. I am not speaking, I don't have the authority to speak for the board. Only the board and the board chairman can speak. So I am speaking as an individual regent who's been here for 14 years.
I have a follow-up question to that. Mr. Geddes, do you know if the Board of Regents took any action after this to prevent any inappropriate behavior from happening again in regards to those emails?
We did. I mean, we chastised the chancellor. The chancellor ended up resigning. He did get his payout when he resigned, but we've implemented policies as far as email communications and what's out there, and we make our email communications available to all. And we basically had a listening session on what we did wrong when we did our self-evaluations, which we do every couple of years, communications, what we do wrong, what we can do better. And just going on to the point, when we met with Assemblyman Anderson, Senator Woodhouse, many other members of the legislature, again, who they all voted, Republicans, Democrats, Independents, voted for this funding formula. They are the ones who vetted the data with their consultant. They're the ones who approved it, and they're the ones who distribute it every year. The legislature can change the funding formula anytime they want. It is completely under their control. But we look at those things and we do self-evaluations and we say, what can we do better? And we put in policies and procedures to be better.
So regardless of whether the chancellor did something wrong, depending on your viewpoint, I think that regardless, the Board of Regents lost trust. So if the legislature and voters are asking for more transparency and accountability from the Board of Regents, what can the Board of Regents do to increase credibility with the legislatures and the voters? Question for you, Mr. Geddes.
I mean, I think with the voters is we all stand for election, and we put everything out, as I said, in our open public meetings, all of our agendas, all of our decisions, all of our records out there. Anybody can read what we've done, and I think it's up to the voters at that point to look at it and make their decision, the oversight. The second part that I would put in there is, what is part 2 of this? And as I said, when we talked to many legislators in 17 and 19, we said, okay, you're going to take us out of the Constitution, then what? Then what are the steps for oversight, transparency, accountability? There are over 320 sections of NRS that give us oversight. When you're talking about community colleges, the legislature gave us the authority over community colleges, not the Constitution, the legislature. So the legislature could take that away any day, and they had an interim study to look at it and decided it wasn't the best thing to do because it would be more costly. I just asked the legislators, and again, I respect them immensely. I was one many, many years ago. But, you know, what are the next steps? What is oversight, transparency beyond our budget and all of the rest of the Nevada revised statutes that we adhere to?
You know, just to respond to a couple of points, you know, really when it comes down to it, Nevada does spend $1.2 billion on higher ed without real oversight. And we are, you know, ranking amongst the highest in student spending. I think we're 16th according to that association that I mentioned, and we're near bottom in degrees awarded. We're about 46 according to the U.S. Census Bureau. And so this is about getting dollars back into the classroom. Now, we've heard about the funding formula. No one's trying to revisit the funding formula. What we want is honest information, and the Board of Regents haven't properly supervised its officials. System officials threatened to sue if the if the legislature tried to reform community colleges. We were told that there would be a lawsuit, and that's why we have to take the regents out of the Constitution, because we constantly get roadblocks for reform and accountability. And so nothing actually has to necessarily happen. This just injects checks and balances into the system. So the Board of Regents is no longer treating the legislature like an adversary and threatening to sue based upon its constitutional standing.
I need to correct the community college statement. The legislature defined the community colleges as being under the Nevada system of higher education. That's nowhere in the Constitution. And the legislature convened an interim study to review separating the community colleges out from the Nevada system. The interim committee of the legislature and the legislature voted not to do that. They voted to keep things in the Nevada system of higher education, and they gave us a set of recommendations to adhere to make sure that the community colleges were getting the treatment that the legislature thought they deserved. All of those spelled out in a letter from Senator Woodhouse, and the Nevada system of higher education has adhered to every single one of those.
Could I also respond to that? Is that a...
Yes.
So, I was the chairman of the Committee on Education back in those days, and we were told by our legal counsel, you've actually now on the record adopted the legislature's legal counsel's opinion. So I find that kind of interesting because, the staff that you were supervising were very clear that there would be a lawsuit, and our legislative counsel bureau advised us that the Board of Regents would sue. And so that's partially why it died. And, community colleges are so important because that's who trains the workforce in Nevada. We don't hear the regents crowing during this campaign about their record on community colleges. We only hear them talking about the research universities. But we have so much business support for this because, the regents have been asleep at the switch on educating Nevada's workforce. We have gone through from recession to recession, 2009 to COVID, and we don't have a diversified workforce. So we need question one to avoid all of these ambiguities over the legislature's power, and so we can have accountability.
I just disagree with you. In 2017, you argued that we were one of the largest states with no R1 university. And now we have both of our universities at the Carnegie R1, very high research designation, which is something we strived for starting in 2013, and we achieved. And that was through legislative support and through private support and research grants. The formula funding, and this addressed the community colleges, we talk about community colleges every single meeting. And we talk about their mission, and we meet with industry. We have institutional advisory councils that are full of industry members. That was one of the recommendations that the legislature made. And we talk with them, what programs do you want? What programs do you need? How do we get more programs in the community? But the formula hurt funding for really our rural community colleges, because historically the College of Southern Nevada was receiving half of the funds that Great Basin College in Elko was receiving. And Great Basin was receiving more than the University of Nevada, Las Vegas. And the formula funding study said that's not right. Every student in Nevada, every community college student, every university student deserves adequate funding. And that's what the formula did, and those changes came out. But we firmly support the community colleges, and we talk about those programs all the time, specifically in the nursing programs, which we doubled in 2004, and then we doubled again in the early 2010s. The legislature wanted more nursing students. With no additional funding, we doubled the output of nursing students at all of our institutions, mainly at the community colleges, where we've also added bachelor programs for nurses there.
I'd like to move back to the text of the ballot question. So this question is for you, Mr. Anderson. Could you expand a little bit more on the Moral Land Grant Act part of the question?
Well, it's important just to remember that question 1 just restores accountability, transparency, and oversight, just like every other state agency in the state of Nevada has. We're getting a lot of fears of what could happen, but every other state agency in the state of Nevada has the thing that question 1 does to the regents. It's just that simple. You know, it doesn't actually change the day-to-day. NRS 396-020 keeps the Board of Regents in control. NRS 396-040 keeps the Board of Regents elected. And, you know, Regent Geddes has been not accurate about my position on, you know, we have a broad coalition and we all disagree on that question. What we're united on is accountability, transparency. As for the Moral Land Grant Act, NRS 396 has other provisions. And the reason, by the way, that they're in NRS 396 is because the Constitution directed us, the legislature, we shouldn't say not us, I'm not a part of it anymore, but the Constitution directed us to make some of those initial laws. And so that's why some of them are there. But for the Moral Land Grant Act language, nothing changes day to day. The Board of Regents still administers it under NRS 396. So again, just accountability, transparency, and oversight.
And I guess I would just ask, because it is accountability, transparency, and oversight. And when we've asked specifically what changes will be made, and in 2017, we came forward and said, we will make the changes you need. What changes do you need? What changes would you like to see? Accountability, transparency, and oversight means what? What specifically do you want from us? And I would ask Assemblyman Anderson, beyond saying, you know, if it passes, you will remove us from the Constitution and you will remove us from being elected so that you can ensure more accountability, transparency, and oversight. What would you pass beyond the 320 plus NRS provisions that are already there delivering accountability, transparency, and oversight? Beyond those catchwords, what do you want to see from the board?
Regent Geddes, you know, I care for you as a friend and I like you, but you're not being honest to people about what I've said. In 2017, there was a 2-part plan that you've called it to make the regents appointed. That's completely false. You cited to the 2017 minutes, and then in 2017 minutes, if you actually read them, the 2-part plan was statutory reform. And the minutes are very clear. You cited some minutes in your op-eds, and they're not true. The 2-part plan was the SAGE Commission for Spending and Government Efficiency. And, you know, you need spending and government efficiency, Regent Geddes, because Nevada is 16th in per student funding and 46th in degree attainment. That is a poor record, and no wonder. We're spending money on, you know, giving executive officials the ability to wine and dine their folks with host accounts. We're having expansive salaries. All state employees want to be NSHE employees because the salaries pay so well. The only thing that I'm advocating for is checks and balances in the I'm not advocating for any particular thing. My personal position is that the regents should stay elected. I've been very clear about that. So with respect to Regent Geddes, I'm not mischaracterizing anything you're saying. Don't mischaracterize our words and our plan, you know, because what you're saying is not true. The legislature, if question 1 passes, I'll be the first person out there telling them to be thoughtful and to make sure that they study all the different ways to do this. And, you know, if the regents start self-policing better and stop giving giveaways, you know, to disgraced chancellors for, you know, misleading the legislature, then nothing has to happen. This is just, this really is just about American accountability, checks and balances, and the same thing that every state agency has.
And I just need to correct on the point as far as the salaries. I know the Nevada Assistant Higher Education salaries compared to other state agencies, compared to the governor, they are much higher. But as you know, we work in an international worldwide marketplace. And if you look at the Chronicle of Higher Education salaries, our chancellor makes lower than the median of chancellors throughout the country. Our presidents are making below the median for presidents at public education institutions around the country, not including private institutions. We won't even want to go there. And those salaries are what are competitive to get the best leaders of our institutions. And we just hired a president UNR, president UNLV, and a chancellor, and all of those salaries were at pretty much the same level as their predecessors. So there weren't massive increases there. And we need, as you will agree, we need leaders at those institutions as we come out of the COVID pandemic and we try and build the Nevada economy back. We need leaders at all 8 of our institutions to help build the new Nevada economy. And I think those salaries are nationally competitive, and they're a small part of the issue. And if you look at our graduation rates and our success rates, they have been increasing over the last several years, and the data is there. We've been improving.
I'm going to move on to the next question. This question is for you, Mr. Anderson. So opponents of the ballot questions say that removing the board from the Constitution will put the political independence of higher education in Nevada at risk. How would you respond to those criticisms of the ballot question?
Well, that's funny because, you know, anybody who runs for election is political. Regent Geddes would have you believe that all these regents sitting there are high-minded higher education experts, but they run for elections just like the legislature. And, you know, I'm for continuing to elect regents. And if we can trust the voters to elect regents, we can trust those very same voters to elect legislators every 2 years and 4 years. If a legislator screws up, they can be replaced almost immediately. You can replace the entire assembly in one election. If a regent screws up, they're in there for 6 years. Question 1 is proof positive. We had a near unanimous vote to reject the regent's expansive view of their authority to restore accountability, transparency, and oversight. The legislature can come together. I mean, you know, Regent Geddes said he came to the legislature. He's been making this argument for a long time. He talked about coming to the legislature and saying, we'll fix whatever we need to. We came to the legislature with, maybe it was Regent Stevens. They said that the legislature is too political, and they sat there and insulted legislators, and they're continuing to say that out on the trail, that legislators can't be trusted. But legislators can be trusted because, you know, they are elected by the same voters that elect you. And, you know, Regent Geddes, I know you keep using the, you know, elections as an excuse or not, but you actually said that you were not opposed to appointing regents. And I am actually opposed, you know, and so you're trying to have it both ways and mislead the voters and trying to stay out of this because, you know, this is the only argument you have to avoid what every other state agency in the state of Nevada has. We really just need checks and balances, oversight and accountability. And I don't think those American concepts that are American as apple pie are too political.
And I'm just going to say, I completely respect the legislature. I completely respect the assembly, the Senate. And I agree with you that we are political. I'm not the one who said that. And I disagreed with that during the public testimony. We all stand for election, and we all stand for election 2 years, 4 years, 6 years, and we're accountable to the public. And I 100% believe in the public's ability to make the right decision for us, to remove you, to replace all of us, to elevate all of you to higher positions in government. It's up to the Nevada voters to decide. I'm not disagreeing with you in any way, shape, or form. We are politicians who run for office. I would just say in my personal account, as I said in the beginning, I've been working with the Nevada system of higher education since I was a student in 1988, and I have a firm love and a belief in the system. I know your love for UNLV and my love for UNR and all 8 of our institutions, and I'm just here to serve and do the best I can with it. And just back to the point, I just want to know what we can do better. I would ask the voters to tell us what we can do better. I would ask Assemblyman Anderson and the current Assembly and Senators to tell us what we can do better. And we're happy to reform and make change. If Q1 passes, if Q1 fails, I'm here with open ears, and I'm willing to make any reforms and changes that people think are necessary.
And back to the point about the way that the regents are selected, I think this is one of the most divisive points of this entire ballot question, and it gets brought up by people on both sides. But Mr. Anderson, is this ballot question meant to change the system through which regents are selected?
You know, this is, again, a misleading attack brought out by the regents. This has been studied and clear. Even Governor Sandoval couldn't get appointed school boards through the legislature in 2015. He even put it in the State of the State address. And there was nothing in the Constitution stopping the legislature from appointing school boards, but that failed. Appointed school boards failed in 15, 17, appointed regents failed in 19. Bill Raggio, Dean of the Nevada Senate, God rest his soul, he even tried to get appointed regents through for a second time in 2009, and that failed in the legislature. It's very, very unpopular, and the regents will have you believe that there's a secret agenda to do all these things. Now, the truth be told, there are people on both sides of that debate, even within the Yes and One coalition, because we're a very broad coalition, because we have business and labor, Republicans and Democrats and independents, faculty, students, former community college presidents who don't feel the regents have done a good job keeping community colleges educating Nevada's workforce. And so the truth be told, and Regent Geddes knows this, question 1 does not directly lead to that. And he knows, because he said to the Nevada Current that he's not opposed to appointed regents. He knows that I am, and he's been trying to mischaracterize what we say, because we're trying to stop all the wasteful spending to even we're ranked 16th in student funding, per student funding, and 46 in college attainment. And there's just an excuse to try to get rid of the accountability.
And I would say it's not an excuse. I agree with what Assemblyman Anderson said, except to the point where Senator Woodhouse introduced her bill, SB 354, in the 2017 legislature. It would make the board 5 elected and 4 appointed officials, a hybrid board like the State Board of Education. And she got it passed through the Senate, and the Senate leadership has made it clear that they've committed to passing it again. Whether it'll fail in the Assembly, and Assemblyman Anderson was instrumental in making sure it didn't pass the Assembly, whether it fails again this time, that is, I'm hopeful, but it is very clear that that is the intent of several legislators to make that change. And I will say, again, if you go back to the data and you look at graduation rates, you look at 2 R1 universities, you look at the degree programs at all of our community colleges as far as nursing pass rates, you look at Western Nevada College that just created a mobile trailer to go out to the Tahoe Reno Industrial Center, teaching electronics and automation to students on site, so they have full access to that program. You look at the programs we developed at TMCC, where we created 1-week, 3-week programs for Panasonic and Tesla, where they could get students in and out of a program in 1 to 3 weeks, where they could get employed at Tesla and Panasonic. We're responsive to the business industry, and whenever they ask for a new program, we try and create it.
Can I respond to that real quick?
Yes.
So I'd like to talk about the business community and the community colleges community, because we have the former heads of Western Nevada College and TMCC on our advisory board. They're big supporters of question 1, as are most of the faculty of both of those schools. They are not happy with the Regents' record at those community colleges, because we are, again, 16th in per student spending, but we are 46 in college degree attainment. We're below the national average, well below in graduation rates. It's not just about research universities, Regent Geddes. I did go to UNLV and I do care about it, but I'm more focused on those community colleges, because we need to diversify Nevada's economy. And in between 2009 and the COVID recession, we've known about the need to diversify our economy, and the Board of Regents just quite simply hasn't cared about that workforce training like they do the research universities. And that's why we have the entire business community of Nevada, every organized business group, I think outside of the Reno Chamber, that is supporting question 1, because the Regents are not doing their job getting an educated workforce for Nevada. And proof is positive. We wouldn't have this broad coalition, and the Regents would not be facing down question 1, but for their bad record on getting degrees out there and getting an educated workforce.
Mr. Anderson, if the day-to-day operations of the Board of Regents will be essentially the same, how will they help community colleges in the way that you're saying, if the day-to-day operations are supposed to be the same?
Well, to start, there's now if question 1 passes, we have accountability, transparency, and oversight, and we have clarity on what the legislature's power is. Again, the Board of Regents has repeatedly argued in court and threatened to file other lawsuits in an effort to negate the original intent of the framers. A lawyer named George Norris from Washoe County said, "We don't want the Board of Regents to have absolute control," back in the 1864 Constitutional Convention. But the Board of Regents have argued in court just that. And because of that attitude, this idea that, they're not a part of the executive branch is what we've heard argued several times by current regents and by system officials going back to the mid-90s, and we've heard it in the halls of the legislature. And so there's always these threats of lawsuits whenever the community colleges are looked at. And that's why all the community college reform went nowhere in the legislature. And so we can't even begin to have those conversations without question one. And since the regents are constitutionally insulated from the normal checks and balances that every state agency has. And so we really need question one before we can even begin to start to correct the regents' bad record, getting people graduated and getting us a workforce to diversify our economy so we don't have these boom and bust cycles going on in our state like we see today.
And we like bringing up these lawsuits, but there has not been a lawsuit since 1981. So we're talking about a 39-year-old lawsuit, and then threats, innuendos, no credible evidence that any lawsuit has been filed since 1981. And that one was adjudicated on behalf of the Nevada System of Higher Education. So the lawsuit and threats of lawsuits, I try not to govern that way. The second part, as far as the funding, is community colleges. We did not get back to the funding level of 2007 until this last fiscal year from what the legislature gave us. So Mr. Anderson, Assemblyman Anderson, is telling us that we're not funding, we're not using our funds appropriately, or we're not putting enough into the community college system. But I would say that the legislature created the funding formula. They determine how much money goes to every community college. They approve the programs for the community colleges. They have all that set up. And, the funding level just came back before we hit the pandemic to what we had back in 2007, 2008. And it's hard to educate with the limited resources. And we've made it up with tuition and fees, which is painful for students.
So could I just respond real quickly? I just want to note that, again, according to trade associations that are renowned in higher education, we are 16th in per student spending. It's not the legislature, they are getting the money there. And Regent Geddes admitted their salaries are really high. He actually said that in this debate. So they're not putting that money into the classroom. We don't have that, the legislature, I'm not a part of it anymore, but they don't have that control once it's sent out the door because they don't have the normal tools and checks and balances. And I want to go back, and I know Regent Geddes is trying to say this lawsuit is ancient history, but it was filed on behalf of the Board of Regents, or was argued on behalf of the Regents by the law firm of Leslie, Walther, Key, Maupin, Oates, Cox, Lee, and Claich. We're talking about this as ancient history, but you may recognize the last name. This is the attitude that virtual autonomy and immunity from the law, threats of lawsuits, that was my experience in my 8 years at the legislature. Threats, lawsuits, and fourth branch of government. And Regent Geddes, you've said before that UNR, when you worked at UNR while you were in the legislature, that wasn't a part of the executive branch. And so, this is the attitude that the legislature has faced, this accountability problem. And this is, again, just returning the law to like every other state agency has. It returns democracy. We talk about trusting the people. This gives the people the opportunity to say, how do we want to organize higher ed? How do we think higher ed should go today? And that's really all that question one does. And
I wasn't the one who argued that I wasn't part of the legislative branch. The Attorney General determined that I was not significant enough as a member of the executive branch to not be able to serve in the legislative branch, which was a precedent was set way before I got there and has continued to this day. And NPRI keeps filing lawsuits against it, but I didn't make that determination. I said our salaries were nationally competitive. I didn't say they were high. I said they were high compared to other state agencies, because that is the truth. And in a national marketplace, it sounds like you want the legislature to be able to set salaries for faculty. If you want to set salaries for faculty or set salaries for presidents or set caps on what those could be, we'll see how competitive higher education is in the national landscape, and we'll see how involved the legislature wants to get in setting salary schedules. We go out and do surveys every year looking at national trends and what the salaries are, and we hire an outside independent agency to set what our salary schedules are, And that's what we hire to. Higher education in the United States of America is expensive.
And, look, question one is about getting money into the classroom when it comes down to it, because right now the legislature has no control over that. So if they can just appropriate the money and it's essentially a blank check. The Board of Regents, unlike every other state agency, doesn't have oversight at all during the interim from the Interim Finance Committee. There's nobody that's looking over the regent's shoulder to make sure that these dollars go to the classroom. Again, we are 16th in per student funding, but we are 46th in college degree attainment. The job of the system of higher education is not to enrich state bureaucrats and to give them host accounts. Is it nationally competitive that we have to give executive host accounts to wine and dine people? We need to focus on the classroom and educating a workforce. That is our primary objective as people who care about higher education, is building an economy and an educated workforce so that we don't have these boom and bust cycles. We don't want to live in a state where whenever gaming tanks, we're not able to pay the bills at the state and have to cut dollars. Like, I am tired of seeing that. And question one, without a question, will finally get some independent oversight over those funds so that we can get those funds into the classroom.
There is no point in your argument where you made it clear that they would get to the classroom more than we already do, and what we do getting money into the classroom. Our formula is set up that you set to give us fees, and we distribute the funds according to your formula, and we hire faculty based on national norms, and all the money we can get into the classroom, we get into the classroom. When we went through the Great Recession, we did all of our cuts to make sure as much money stayed in the classroom as possible, because getting students to succeed, getting students to graduate is our #1 goal.
I'd like to touch on Mr. Anderson's point repeatedly that $1.2 billion goes to NSHE every year, and proponents, what?
Every 2 years.
Biennial, excuse me. But other proponents of the ballot question point to a $26 million administrative biennial budget as evidence of taxpayer dollars going to waste. Mr. Geddes, can you respond to these criticisms?
Yeah, that number is just incorrect. So the legislature appropriates money to the Nevada System of Higher Education for system administration. That appropriation is just over $5 million a year. So it's $10 million for the biennium. What the legislature also does is we have what's called the System Computing Services, which oversees computing services for the Nevada Higher System of Education. And that money that funds that division goes into the System Administration Office to make it look, so the proponents make it look like that budget is much bigger. But in addition to this System Computing Services servicing system administration, every Nevada System of Higher Education institution, we also support the court system. As we've gone through this pandemic, you've seen the federal courts, the district courts having to resort to Zoom or Blue Jeans calls for talking to prisoners in the Department of Corrections, or holding hearings, Department of Transportation, K-12 education throughout the state, medical clinics throughout the state. All of that is within that budget. That budget is appropriated by the legislature, and it's housed in the Nevada System of Higher Education, but it serves the entire state and many state and federal agencies.
Just to talk about the broader point. So I get Regent Geddes' point that there's a system computing center, and I think sometimes the centralization kind of goes too far, because like research institutions and community colleges are fundamentally different organizations with different missions. And so it's kind of sometimes like trying to pound a square peg into a round hole when you try to deal with them all at once. But I think the broader point that's clear is that the system office in Nevada, over 9 institutions, has more employees than Virginia, with far more schools. And so that's a result of this over-centralization of trying to fit the community colleges and the research institutions all into one umbrella. And so, what happens is that the community colleges, and again, that's why we have Northern Nevada Community College presidents, former ones, on our advisory board who are advocating for question one, because we really need to do a better job with a workforce. And so that's the broader point of the statistics about the system office, is that we put far much more money into salaries there, where it sometimes, doesn't really do justice to all the institutions.
And I would disagree with Assemblyman Anderson. If you pull the system computing services staff out of that number, and I've been arguing against this number that was brought up since 2010, we are small, much smaller than Virginia as far as actual system administration staff. And the analysis that former Chancellor White did, you look at it, we're right on par with Kansas, we're right on par with Louisiana, states of our similar size, the number of employees we have in the system office, not inflating it with that SES, is right on par to where we should be. And I would say those are the former presidents. I've talked with all of them, the community colleges. I know exactly where they sit. I would ask you to talk to the current community college presidents. Our president at Western Nevada College and our president at the College of Southern Nevada specifically said they loved coming here because they could work with Nevada State College and UNR and UNLV and have a system where they could have seamless transition for students to get whatever degree they wanted.
Well, just to respond to that and talking about the current college president. So we basically have an employer here, Regent Geddes, saying, talk to my employees. They'll tell you what I want them to say, essentially. That's, of course, anybody who works for someone is going to give the answer that the boss is looking for. That's really not a persuasive argument, Regent Geddes, because they're not free to talk. The Board of Regents, and you've seen scandals all over the place where the regents have threatened to retaliate against system administrators for upholding academic integrity. It's renowned. I know that administrators, when I served at the legislature, were afraid to even talk to me for fear of retaliation. There was threats to get in line and give the message to the legislature. They're afraid to come and talk to the legislature. This whole scandal with the funding formula started over the system of higher education trying to control all the information that went to policymakers. Regent Geddes has repeatedly said that it's the legislature's funding formula. It's one that was marred by misleading system officials and regents who then gave the people who did the misleading to the legislature a golden parachute of hundreds of thousands of dollars after they tried to mislead the legislature about how they proposed to spend over $1 billion every 2 years. So the information that you're getting from current presidents is just not going to be as credible as people who are free to tell speak their minds without threats of losing their job.
I would just say you don't have to ask them under my authority. Go back to the minutes of their interviews when they were up here talking about wanting to take a job and the excitement there. Go to the open public meeting minutes where they talked about the excitement of having those systems, including just the UNR search that we just concluded that talked about that, as well as the chancellor search, where the chancellor and the presidents liked the opportunity that was presented for them. And not just the ones that were hired, the ones who were interviewing were looking into it and liked it. And I would say again, go back to the 2011 formula funding study. All of the data is there, it's available. It was given from the Nevada Assemblyman Higher Education to the legislative consultant, SRA International, who's on the record saying all of the data is good and we believe all of the data based on the source it came from, and audit the data if you want. But it was all handed over and it's all there for anybody to go look at.
Thank you. Brett, do you have any questions?
Excuse me. I think I'm all square. So if we want to move on to the 1 minute wrap up statements, Regent Geddes, do you want to lead off this time?
Sure. Thank you again, Assemblyman Anderson. I always enjoy debating with you, although we come down on different sides of the issues. And but hopefully we'll continue these talks through the years, whether Q1 passes or Q1 fails. I would just encourage everybody out there. The legislature has 320 plus different provisions of the NRS that sets the size of the board, the districts of the board, our budget. And the one thing that they don't have is the ability to make us appointed. Assemblyman Anderson does not support that position. Many of his former colleagues do. My concern is if you want your right to vote, vote no on Q1. And if you want to keep the legislature out of defining academic freedom. Whatever could happen, I believe the current legislature would never touch it, but who knows what the future will do once that's in the Constitution. Thank you both for having me, and thank you, Elliot. We'll be talking in the future, I know.
Okay, Elliot Anderson, 1 minute.
Yeah, again, you know, I'd also like to, you know, say some nice things about Regent Geddes. I appreciate a good spirited debate about law and all of this history. And I think it's important. I'm glad that we're here to give voters more information about question one. And, you know, you've heard a lot of excuses about what could question one do or what ifs and whatnots. And the reality of it is all those things are just, you know, guessing, slippery slope type of arguments about what could happen. But, you know, the reality of it is question one just gives the legislature the power to pass law. That's basic American government, that the legislature writes the law and the executive branch executes the law. They enforce the law. That's all that question one does. It's checks and balances, accountability. It does not change the day-to-day of higher education. You know, enough is enough. We have been plagued by decades and decades of scandals, cover-ups, wasteful spending, 46 in college attainment while 16th in per pupil funding. Question one will finally bring this independent oversight and accountability to Nevada higher ed and put our tax dollars into the classroom. Thank you so much for having us.
Okay, thank you, gentlemen. Thank you, Taylor. Thank you all for joining us.
Thank you, Taylor and Brett. Appreciate it. Thanks again, Elliot.
Big thanks to all our viewers on this. I hope this was enlightening. Thank you all.